flats, right? Because pretty much every glide is exactly on course line, and then the circles will add track log length without much XC distance, but they're much closer numbers. But if you go and look, if you go to full screen on this kind of thing, what I can see from this, especially because there's this thing down there, if you just drag it along, right, this is a triangle I did. I think it's an old triangle. I might have done this on a 4-liner. Yeah, I did do this on a 4-liner. So, oh no, it's actually an Aspen 4. That was a 3-liner, wasn't it? Yeah. So, launched at Woodside. And you see by dragging, you can actually see, you see where down here, where I'm pointing, right? Mm-hmm. You can see the height above ground, and you can, and if you actually click on it, it kind of takes you closer to there. And you can basically see where you got the climbs. If you zoom in on a high-res track log, you can see the wind direction, right? So there's a ton of information. Like, there's a level of ego and competition to posting a track log, but it's actually also a huge gift, right? Like, if you haven't been to an area or you want to figure out how Kriegel did that flight and he posts his track log, when I first learned how to hang glide, it was black magic, right? Like, so-and-so went from here to here, and there was all these myths about they did it. Oh, he did it in a Q&M. Oh, he flew via here, and then, like, no one knew. And now, you know to the meter. You know how many thermals he took, you knew everything. So actually, if you don't have to be, like, I know Mr. Cloud Hobo over here, Miguel, is probably like, oh my God, these guys love their computers so much, right? But there is a lot of information in here.
Oh, so what was the altitude that you did the transition from Woodside over to?
So yeah, you can kind of just scroll up to here, and you can sort of see that number. You probably can't see it over there. Oh my God, I was nice and high, 1,600 meters.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So like leaving Woodside, like, yeah, let's talk about this in specifics, and then we'll watch the thing. But like leaving Woodside on a modern glider in a pod harness, if you're over 1,400 meters, you have a really good chance of getting there to over to Sasquatch. The classic Raymont triangle is actually not out to Sasquatch first. I think when I first did it, I didn't do that. But it's actually a really nice thing to do in the morning, because a lot of times, the only problem with going to Sasquatch first is it's an easy place to sink out at the very beginning of the day. So I don't 100% recommend it.
So where's Sasquatch? I went for
So Sasquatch is over here where it calls itself Pretty Peak.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, you know, gliding over there, you can see you lose a lot. You arrive low, like 600 meters, you know, and then you basically climb up on Sasquatch. It's actually, you just keep pushing in. And once again, this is another thing that's done much better early in the season. And that's another reason why, like, trying to do this flight even now at this time of the year would be getting late, because the valley breeze is likely to pick up earlier. And also Harrison Bay is full of water, so the landing fields aren't there, right? So this is really a much better spring flight. Like a lot of like in general rules, I say I fly Woodside in the spring. In the Fraser Valley, I usually fly Benny or Bridle in the summer. Maybe go to Woodside for a glass off or something like that, or an early morning flight. But there's a kind of a progression of sites you use as the season changes. And they do that in Europe. Like in Europe, they'll be like, we fly this site in spring, and then later in the year we go to these sites.
How high were you at there?
So yeah, I got up there nice and high. Well, it was like 1,700 meters. It's not a lot of height. It's actually a long glide back to Woodside. And the arrival at Woodside is kind of into the trees. You know, you're looking at landing at like Riverside if you don't make it up. At Woodside, you're not going to make it out to James a lot of the time. So going over the back to, like, this might actually be the first XC most people do, is actually starting where we are now. So you get up at Woodside and you go to Mount Agassiz. And actually going to Mount Agassiz, like here I'm really high, so you can see I just completely straight line it. I don't try to follow the mountain at all. I've actually done this flight, like I've done this super low, and I followed the mountain all the way around at like 1,100 meters, and I get up, and there's actually thermals. The earlier you do it in the day, the less lee side it is, and the more it's been on the sun, because this whole face is actually east facing. You can actually do this flight, like I've launched from Woodside at 11 and been over at Mount Agassiz at like 11:30. You can actually do it as a morning flight, right? Because it's all in the sun. Look at this, it's all southeast facing, right? So don't, like, if you're not super high, like, don't take the line I'm taking here. That's how I'm high and I know where I'm going. If you're going over the back of Woodside first, follow the ridge, and you'll get 2 climbs before you get to Agassiz Mountain. And Woodside isn't that rotary. As long, like, I don't go over the back of Woodside low if it's like low in 20Ks. We're talking like 10Ks, 15Ks. The difference between going over the back at 10Ks and 20Ks is a lot. Like, I don't know if you remember your, in the course they might have told you the wind speed, the power in the wind is not linear. So 20 kilometers an hour is 4 times more powerful than 10, which is why, like, when wind gets a little bit stronger, it's a lot stronger, right? And that's something to really be aware of with rotor formation, like, especially on the coast. Like, I go over the back of Woodside in 20 kilometers an hour wind if I'm high enough, right? Going over the back of, like, a coastal ridge soaring site, your ridge soaring in 20 Ks of wind is not something you do. You know? Not directly over the back, you know, not into the lead.
Another, so the question about, like, how high you are when you're doing transitions. One thing probably is not to be fooled is to monitor your ground speed always. So if you have tons of height, but you're battling a headwind, it seems kind of easy when you're thinking about it on the ground. But sometimes when you're flying, you get stuck in there, and you're like, my ground speed's only 20K. So you can be 2,000 meters, but you're not going far. So, I mean, we can actually see on here when we're looking at these long straight legs between thermals. If you look at the speed and ground speed, you can kind of tell what the weather was doing on, or what the wind was doing on this day. So if you're flying along at 50K, probably a trim, you know that you got a 15K, 14, 13K tailwind. So you can kind of look at these, and even a year later, whatever, in the past, you can kind of guess what the wind was doing on this particular day when this track log was laid down.
And you can also look in the track right here, and you see where I hover it over here? On the bottom of the screen, right down in, I don't think it actually shows up there, there's actually numbers on the computer screen, and it tells you your meters per second up or down, and your ground speed. So you can actually figure out, like in the flats, when I was like, oh, that was a really windy day, and I'll see 89s and 90s downwind, and that's like honking. Yeah, that's like, I really hope there's like a wind gradient, so that when I get to the wind, it's ground, it's like 20, 25, not 40. So, yeah, that can be one of the keys to flying safely in the flats is having a wind gradient in your day. This isn't a normal arrival, Richard, at Bear, because I got there and I didn't do much. You want to know why? I'm betting it was a bit north. Look at the circles there. And that's another big thing. When you get to Mount Agassiz, if you see any wind here that indicates north wind, look at this. Look at the map. You've got this huge lake, right? And even in light outflow, there'll be some wind. And if there's going to be any wind, like we'll be hiding in the fairly well protected lee at Woodside. By the time you get here and you're doing the crossing, it's not very well protected. And I saw people get shot down this year a couple times. I actually went instead of going to Bear, because I saw the north wind, and I was at Agassiz, and I said, I don't want any part of that. And I went over to here. I went over to what we call Green Mountain. And I got up on Green Mountain because I saw a cloud there. And the people over here were getting spat off. And me and James were there earlier this year on a different flight, not this one. And James had to run around and was like groveling in here, did a very good job of surviving and getting out, right? But I got out, and it was like, when it's like that in Bear, the higher you arrive, like there's this double ridge thing here. Have you been there, Richard?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I got spat out, and then.
Was it a north day?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. It's not usually worth going over towards the beach. If I sink out at Bear, I usually aim, you can see where I'm aiming. There's actually like a scree slope in here, and you can see there's some gullies. I'm aiming here, and if I sink out or get flushed, I'm landing over here, what we call Seabird Island.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about, oh, I'm gonna go here and then land at Harrison if I don't get out. Because what works much better at Bear is this face in here, and the more you go over here, the more it's wind scrubbed by wind either going north or south. So that's why it's really good to know. Like when I went to Europe, a couple times I didn't know the larger picture of the terrain, and you want to know where are the weaknesses, where are the winds going to try to come through. They have a thing called the Bavarian wind, which is like the into the mountains wind in Europe, and there's a place called Pasturn, and I didn't know the Pasturn was a weakness. It's not totally obvious when you're flying. And as I flew along the Pinzgau Valley, I was like, oh, there's no clouds on the next mountain. I wonder. And as I got halfway across this crossing, I'm pointing into the wind, and I'm like, oh shit. And that was that valley snakes its way out, and the wind from the Bavarian flatlands comes into the mountains, and it's like super well known, right? And I just blundered into it, and the locals were like, oh, you should just run across the valley and bridge sword up the other side. Which I eventually did, but it took me a while of getting beat up before I figured it out. So,
How much wind do you normally look for on Harrison Lake? You looking for like little bits or just the odd white cap?
if you see any significant north wind, it's going to be kind of ugly up there. Yeah, like pretty much anything. It can be like glassy up here, but down here where it's venturing in, even if you see like 10 or 15 k's of north wind, I'm on my guard.
Which is pre-white cap, because that day that
Pre-white cap, yeah, it wasn't much that day.
Yeah, it wasn't much, and you got there a little bit higher and got off, and I was in the partial lead, scrubbing around over top of those high tension power lines, which is also fun.
Yeah.
But it wasn't much.
Because really, you think about it, like up here in the big wide part of the lake, it was glassy. There was 10 or 15 here, but as it rips around the corner, it was 15, 20, you know? Just enough to make it difficult.
Do you find the first or the second ridge works